Hi, this is Paul. In the comments, Luke Thompson put a link to this conversation, which I hadn't seen. It's fairly fresh. It was posted yesterday, October 19, on Aubrey Marcus's channel. That's 372 subs. I didn't know him. I came across him on Chris Williamson's channel at one point, and I think someone said, yeah, he's a friends with Rogan, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know much about the guy. I've seen some things. I've watched some of this. He seems very much to be in the, what I call sort of the contemporary nature religion category. We're going to have your best life now, and we're going to maybe employ ancient religious traditions and what we can harvest from them in order to have our best life now. I'm working on a lot of those themes in my sermons. You can find them in my rough drafts. I'm about to restart my adult Sunday school class, and some of those themes will come out. You know how I have God number one and God number two. I also sort of have law number one and law number two that are parallel to God number one and God number two, and I actually work some of those into my sermon this week. We'll see if they make the cut by Friday. I will probably post this on Friday morning. But interesting conversation between Jonathan Pageau and Aubrey Marcus. Now, I haven't posted a couple of those randos conversations yet. A big topic amongst the randos and amongst a lot of people who have been listening carefully to this little corner of the internet is the question of on-ramp. Grim Grizz calls it onboarding, which whenever I hear onboarding, I think about what employees have to do to sort of be brought in to fill out their tax forms and such from the HR department. But I'm calling it on-ramp in terms of helping this little corner be more accessible. Now, of course, Jordan Peterson is a well-known name in the popular culture. Jonathan Pageau, increasingly so, of myself, Vervaeke and Pageau. He's got the biggest YouTube following, probably in terms of fame, sort of the best known. He sat next to Jordan in the Muhammad hijab conversation and has been with Jordan in a number of things. And so, although John has been on Lex Fridman, I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan finds his way onto Lex Fridman at some point. And so this question of on-ramp or onboarding or helping this little corner of the internet be more accessible. And I think part of it is sort of helping this little corner of the internet have an idea about what we're doing. Interesting listening to John talk with someone like Aubrey Marcus, who is, as I said, sort of a proponent of what I've been calling in my sermons, nature religion. You know, we want to have our best life now. We want to have our best food now. We want to have our best sex now. We want to figure out how to regulate our dopamine. We want to use all the evolutionary psychology and the neuroscience and all of that to sort of optimize my life. Okay. Now, again, as I've been talking about, that doesn't really get into the question of what is the good. It sort of assumes the what is the good. And of course, a lot of these things are sort of comparative. Well, better sex is better than less good sex, and better food is better than less good food, and more enjoyment is better than suffering. And there's this big current that sort of runs through our culture of unassumed values. And often channels like his are sort of havens of self-maximalization in pursuit of these sort of unexamined values. And, you know, I want my best life now. And again, this is in my sermon last week. I mentioned how, maybe I'll just read it. I believe this was from Kenneth Bailey's commentary on 1 Corinthians. To the modern person, it comes as somewhat of a surprise how seldom ancient pagans expressed any hope for or interest in eternal life or personal resurrection. What they generally sought from religion was blessings in the present, such as health, wealth, rescue from peril, or the promise of good harvest or a child. So let's say with Aubrey Marcus, it's better food and better sex and better relationships and yada, yada, yada. It's sort of it's hedonistic, but not everyone is sort of shallowly hedonistic in these pursuits. And I heard in that conversation, mention of the Epicureans, so on and so forth. And I might do some commenting on that conversation. There are some points there that were interesting. This is especially clear when one reads through the numerous personal questions asked of the Oracle of Delphi. How may I become a parent? What can I do, or what can I say or do to please the gods? Now, again, to please the gods could be extremely mercenary, because if you please the gods give you favor. The gods then can use their power to give you what you want. And if you read something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, the gods are, especially in the Iliad, the gods are always sort of wading in and choosing their favorites and doing what they want. Shall I succeed? What is the truth about blank? Where shall I go and settle? All these questions are about the affairs of this lifetime and how things will turn out. They are prompted by disease, death, plague, famine, war, problems of rulership, career opportunities, desire for marriage, infidelity, portents in heaven, and the like. In short, the oracle was looked to for answers about mundane matters, even if they are quite important mundane matters. We say more about pagan prophecy when we discuss 1 Corinthians 14. And so in some ways, YouTube sort of replaces the oracle at Delphi, which brings up, we've got some of these tensions both within this little corner, because of course it's not a Christian corner necessarily. There are certainly many Christians that are active in it, but there are many who are not Christians that are active in it. But it also gets into questions about, okay, how can Jonathan Pageau engage someone like this? How should he do it? Now, this gets into a lot of questions about, should he just point out all the ways that he's wrong? Every time Aubrey Marcus said something wrong, should he catch him on it or argue about it? And there's a lot of this stuff going on. Now, last night, Jacob's been doing some really interesting work on his little Let's Just Chatting streams, and I jumped. He's using SteamYard. I think that's it. StreamYard. Steam is the game thing. StreamYard is the thing. And I jumped on one this afternoon again, and he and Mark Lefevre of the YouTube channel Navigating Patterns were talking last night, and they were talking about me, which is always sort of fun to listen in on. And so some of the stuff that Jacob said caught me by surprise, and Mark too. And I thought, well, I'm gonna address this, and I'm gonna sort of make a little video about this, because my point here is to kind of open conversation about conversation. Now, I posted in its entirety a conversation that he had with Father Eric and Catherine and Eamon Wilson. And one of the points that they talked about in this little corner is that we are, trying to model conversation and how to have conversation in relationship. And of course, I made that video about, responding to some of Nathan's critiques of this little corner, doing some commentary on his, which I thought was a very good conversation with John Vervaeke. Now, what's interesting about this is the take on the different conversations and the manner of it. Now, of course, everybody gets to have their own opinion, but a lot of it has to do with, well, what's the proper way to respond to critics? What's the proper way to respond to people, let's say, who are in different religious tribes? What's the proper way to, and even, proper sort of holds it up against some abstract, disembodied ideal. And you might say, well, what's the best way to respond to a particular critic or a particular criticism? And I'm going to play a little bit of this here, because it was quite fun to listen to their impressions, because their impressions and my impressions were quite different. So, and I know both these guys, and one of the things that I should probably play this of a conversational habit that Sam was pointing out.
Okay, Paul, I am not going to back down from something that I actually believe.
He won't.
Is real.
Well, you don't have to.
I was asking you to.
I don't think he's asking that. If one of the conversations we had on your channel was, what is this little corner of the internet about? And I think, and that was the conversation with Father Eric and the Wilsons. And I thought you guys really touched on the point that a big part of what we want to practice in this little corner of the internet, and a Vervaekian use of the word practice, is conversations in which we can be confident, self-assured, secure in our position, which allows us to be both firm, but probably not too, I
Paul,
don't have the right word, triggered.
see, this is the thing. And it goes back to what we were talking about as far as you being a doormat, right? I don't think you're a doormat. You're not. You practice what is something that actually works a lot of times, which is this peaceful resistance. This, I am the calm person, and other people are, other people recognize that that the person who's triggered must be wrong, right? And it's very much kind of like what's the name of that thing that whoever brings up Hitler first loses?
Godwin's
Right?
law.
Yeah, Godwin's law, right? Whoever brings up Hitler first loses. The problem with that is then I can never make a Holocaust analogy. Then I can never express the fact that this is something really, really important to me. And on the internet, the people who scream are the people who are getting all the attention, and the people who are quiet and calm aren't.
Yeah. But I do believe the meek will inherit the earth.
Well, that's
And
a
if
nice
someone did a
thing.
psyop to pacify militant Jewish messianism into Christianity,
This was a little earlier conversation we had.
that was the most backfired psyop in human history. And one would have to ask if you had created something that was more powerful than the thing that created it. And if that's true, then what is the source of that thing, right?
Okay, so look, I ultimately am a Pharisee, a Judaizing Pharisee, and I believe in the power of the Logos, and I take precisely the Pharisee position, which I do believe ultimately will inherit the earth, which is that the power of the Logos is in fact what is the most powerful.
Yeah, but who's the Logos? Even I might give you an answer you don't expect on that one.
He wanted to have it theological.
And I would give you an even better answer, which is when Isaiah 53 talks about in his deaths in the plural, and if you look it up, while it gets translated in his death, it's actually in the plural, in his deaths.
Well, Jacob, you know as well as I do, you can plural a word in Hebrew to intensify it, not necessarily to make it more multiple.
No, that's not what's going on there. No. And you might understand that actually, eventually, yes, Christianity will deliver on the payload that it was always meant to deliver, which is Judaism.
All right, but Jacob, so Paul touched on something that I was trying to say, and per usual, Paul said it a little bit better than I did, that it's hard to talk to you about this subject because you make it, I have an authority, you don't know.
I didn't want to make this about Sam's comment on Jacob's style. Sam goes on, we go on a little bit more to talk about one of the big 5 factors of this little corner of the internet is that we tend to gather people who are low in agreeableness. And Jacob is pretty low in agreeableness. Sam higher, more so, but that's not an uncommon trait here. And that trait, I think, does impact people's idea about what kind of conversation is appropriate and best towards what end. And, one of the points that I had made with Jacob earlier, I don't want to dox Jacob too much in terms of his past, but if you go to Jacob's channel, he's having a lot of very interesting conversations with Muslims, and Jacob started his life in a very Muslim area of the world. And so he's got a lot more experience with that part of the world and that religion than I do. And he also comes from a place in the world that is far more traditional than here. And we talked about how I don't insist that people call me Reverend Vanderclay, and I don't wear a clerical collar. And Jacob, in fact, bought me 2 shirts, both with clerical collars, because he would like me to wear them. And so when he talks about the conversation between Nathan and John Vervaeke, he felt that Nathan was very disrespectful to John in that conversation. Another thing that we talked about in that conversation was sort of the quality of, especially my little area of this little corner of the internet, which is kind of the island of misfit toys. I have always had the same gift that my father has in terms of sort of attracting and embracing and gathering to me people of disparate ideas and values, often who are low in agreeableness, but to sort of try to help make this strange little community work together. One of my favorite pieces, one of the favorite things that Tim Keller plucked out of Jonathan Edwards is his observation of Jesus as having very much in some ways seemingly contradictory and diverse excellencies. Jesus is more, Tim Keller puts this quite well, Jesus is more demanding than we think is responsible, and Jesus is more loving than we think is responsible. And these qualities of Jesus are part of the reason why he continues to fascinate people on. So last night I caught some of this conversation between Jacob and Mark, and they were talking about Nathan, and they were talking about the conversation that I had with Vaush back in 2019. And it really caught me by surprise. 2 things. First, because Mark had never heard it. And secondly, because of Jacob's take on it, which really kind of surprised me, because other people had heard the conversation and had a very different take on it. I'm thinking about taking another clip of your talk with you and Mark last night when you said that you thought Vaush mopped the floor with me. Wow, my impression of my conversation with Vaush was very different from yours.
He was jabbing, and he was constantly like throwing in all these little digs, and I guess maybe you didn't even notice he was throwing in all these little digs.
Well, so I was looking at that today, and I just noticed that. So I was on with this guy who organized it, and we couldn't see Vaush. But if you look at Vaush's stream, he keeps mugging at the camera and doing that stuff. So that might be, you might be right.
I couldn't even watch all of it. It was just like, if it had been me, I would have either confronted especially all his digs at Jordan Peterson. Well, he had you there as supposedly Jordan Peterson's champion, and was just sitting there essing on Jordan Peterson left and right. And
Paul beat him in a way that is still the more Jesus-y way than you seem to acknowledge as a way of beating people.
Well, I said this last night. It was, his response was very much, and that may be the best response to Vaush. The best response to Vaush may in fact be to be holier than thou and be like the Gandhi and Martin Luther King figure, and like just way.
Because I felt like Paul secretly conversationed him, and Vaush didn't even realize that was happening, and like none of Vaush's jabs are really that good in the first place, so responding to them might not be the best way, and like showing a different way of interacting was actually the way to beat Vaush. That's what I haven't watched that in a long time, but my memory of Paul talking to Vaush was that Vaush had no idea that he even got beat, because it was such a different form of being beat than he even knew to recognize.
Right. So there was some sort of jujitsu going on there that I think was working. And to some extent, maybe that's what happened with Vervaeke and Nathan. Nathan's his name, right? But the problem there is, Vervaeke's like, he treated me respectfully. No, he didn't. No, he did not. The respect that Professor John Vervaeke, one of the preeminent psychologists and philosophers and scientists in the freaking world, in addition to all of his intellectual chops, being one of the most popular YouTubers in the world, deserves, is far beyond what Nathan, whatever his name is, was giving him.
I think there's this is really helpful for me, Jacob, because I think I sense a sort of a cultural rift here between your. I mean, I sense it seems to me that you're, and it makes a lot of sense to me that you very much expect a degree of reverence for the status that John Vervaeke has. Now, John Vervaeke, very much in our culture, is not going to play that card.
I know. This is a problem I actually spoke to Eamon about, and it's a problem I've been trying to speak to you about, and trying to make you wear collars, and going around to calling you the Reverend, and calling people doctor, and when on the stream that you put on. So I actually edited Father Eric's title like it was, and I put Father Eric Sites, because look, this is a game that the Protestants are really bad at playing, and the people who claim the game doesn't exist are always the people who are like, we're anti-legalism. They always end up doing the most ridiculous legalist things in the world. They do, and I'm sure you've seen it. So the people who pretend, no, there's no hierarchies, there's no status games. Of course there are status.
I don't know, man. The Quakers really seem to have pulled that one off. They really seem to have meant it.
Well,
and where are they now?
More influential than they're given credit for.
People give them credit for.
A little conversation about the Quakers there. That's true. They must have a lot more power than I give them credit for.
So, but Jacob, I do kind of agree with you that American culture, which is just very downstream of anti-hierarchical Protestant ideas, has a misunderstanding of the
irony, of course, is that, Jacob says bad theology, and if I decided I wanted to get all pissy on that and be upset with Jacob because Jacob says unkind things about the Apostle Paul, he says nice things about Jesus, he says unkind things about Calvinist theology, he says unkind things about a bunch of these things, despite the if I wanted to say, okay, Jacob, call me by my title, Jacob. He doesn't do that. I'm not gonna do that with him. I love Jacob. Jacob's a friend, and I'm not. Jacob has his opinions about my religion and my behavior and my beliefs, and those are his opinions, and that's okay, and we can talk about them. But I wanted to set this up because, of course, there are different ways of approaching this, and all of this goes into this question of how do we have conversations with each other? What are the best kinds of conversations? What are the best kinds of practices? Should we sort of go at it tooth and nail, so on and so forth? Sam has a few more good things to say here before I jump to the other video.
Trappings of hierarchy and that sort of thing. Even Americans have trouble understanding British monarchy, right? And England has like the most similar culture to our culture, if like you exclude like Canada or Australia or something, right?
It's bad theology.
Well, But here's the thing, though. It has its strengths. And I feel like there's a reason why America is the strongest country in the world. And it is this weird paradox of if you don't make anyone too powerful and if you distribute power, it prevents you from doing stupid, bad things. And if everyone else is doing stupid things and you do less stupid things less often, you end up the most powerful country. Right? There is something of...
We inherited it from the British, who, they're still kind of working that kind of stuff out.
Right.
I am not going to deny that the Protestant Reformation had good criticisms of the Catholic Church. What I am going to say is what Father Eric said in our conversation, which is it's time for the Protestants to give it up. They've gotten about as much mileage out of this as possible, and they just need to go back to the Catholic Church.
Now let me ask you something, Jacob. If I were to play the game, this is wonderful.
We're getting really high status.
Your channel's going to blow up, Jacob. Here it comes.
It already has. When I look, every time I look at the statistics on my Genesis 1 video, I marvel. I absolutely marvel.
Okay, but let me get back to my point here, Jacob.
Okay.
If I were to play the game you are suggesting I should play, would we be friends?
I'm friends with Father Eric.
He's very American himself. He's very humble.
Oh, we're all Protestants. I'm the most Protestant Jew you've ever met.
You don't know all the Jews I know, Jacob.
Anyway, that's good enough for that one. But this was the night before, and it sort of set up the conversation that we had today. You can see I'm wearing the same shirt.
Exactly. But I and look, I mean, I think you see this all the time, right? You can look at the nice thread we had on John Vanderklay's channel around that nice little talk that Nathan and Vervaeke did, right? And
I didn't actually watch it. I can't stand Nathan.
Well, it was interesting, but a lot of the undercurrent of what was going on there, Paul doesn't know and John doesn't know. They don't know, no idea, right? And so to your point, they're having a conversation with Nathan in good faith, and Nathan, I know, is not a good faith actor. He's not a good faith actor.
He's definitely not a good faith actor.
Okay, and of course that's the opinion of both of these guys. And a little later in the conversation, Mark and Jacob, well, particularly Mark, will talk about some events that happened in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord, and Jacob will talk about some events that happened in the Bridges of Meaning Discord and some of that. But the point here isn't Nathan.
And engaging him in good faith. I mean, did you see Vanderklay's discussion with Vaush?
No, I don't think I ever did.
So Vaush actually named it one of the best discussions he's ever had. Like, he had a top 10 show. It might have been for the year. It might have been even more for a year. And it was like number 4 in his top 10 discussions ever on his channel.
Wow.
And Paul was, I hate to put it this way, but a doormat the way only a Calvinist Christian could possibly be. And it was, when dealing with someone like Vaush, it may have been, in fact, the best way to deal with him.
Yeah.
Because it reminds me of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., like just sitting there and letting themselves be mauled. Right. And
so I'm going to play that. I'm going to append that recording. Now I'm going to append the recording from my side without Vaush's face. I'm going to put a link below with a recording from Vaush's side, and you can watch the chatter in the channel. And he took a fair amount of heat from that conversation from his audience because of the Christian Reformed Church's stance on same-sex marriage.
Paul was just he wasn't reacting, right? He was just taking punch after punch after punch. And
that's Rocky 1. We all like Rocky 1.
Trying to still have a nice, affable, And even Paul, I don't think usually is able to maintain that level of composure under constant assault the way Vaush was going at him. And I just,
which is so funny because I didn't feel at all like it was constant assault. I mean, Vaush and I sort of, I've mentioned this before before the conversation. Somebody called me, another significant YouTuber's channel's bigger than mine, was bigger than mine then, and said, "Don't talk to this guy. You know, he'll kneecap you. It'll be a bad faith conversation, yada, 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 yada." But the conversation, I thought it was lovely. I thought we had a great conversation. I'm really proud of that conversation, which is why I'm going to play it again.
couldn't stand it. And I have to say, I don't know if that is the best way to deal with Vaush.
Sure.
I suspect that it's possible Paul, in fact, did advance his cause. At the same time, I think it's possible that it advanced it with some people and didn't with far more people.
I don't know about far more, but I think that's true. I mean, in almost all respects, whatever way you go at this, and as I watch, responses on Twitter and on YouTube comments to just whole ranges of conversations, it shouldn't surprise us that human beings have diversities of opinions that go quite broad.
Right. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what's hard here. And I don't know if I honestly I don't know what is the best way to go about dealing with things here.
But because it's a spirit, to your point, right? So you've got Vaush's spirit, right, that's running along one line, right? And then you've got this spirit of, these, the Muslim factions, right? The various spirits there, because there are spirits there, to your point. And
Sam had commented early on that, some of the Christian atheist conversations were heated, but a lot of the online Muslim apologetics, I mean, it doesn't have the same floor that even pretty outspoken Christians will have as they disagree with each other or they disagree with atheists or some of this.
And then you've got these all kinds of people, they have this spirit of destruction, right? They don't want to build things up. They want to tear things down. They want to come into communities and say, here's why you're wrong. And that's great. And you know what? Maybe those communities are wrong for that reason, but they're building something. And maybe in the building, they'll correct the thing. I don't know. I'm not claiming that that's going to happen. I have no idea. But all you're doing is tearing things down, which is very easy to do, right? It's very easy. I have a video on postmodernism where I basically say postmodernism is a bunch of 4-year-olds, right? Because any 3 or 4-year-old can say why 100 times until you run out of answers, and that's all postmodernism does, right? It just it allows you to sound smart when all you're doing is tearing stuff down, and you're not building anything. You're not adding anything.
Okay, so if you're curious about that, the links to all of these are, of course, below. But yeah, and Jacob's question is my question too. And I mean, having conversations about conversations, it's a little meta, and it can get very abstract and perhaps a little, disconnected. But it's a good question, and so I'm going to. This was posted in 2019, and so I would imagine that many of you have either forgotten about it or some of you have come before it. And I know if I post it that you'll give me your ideas, and because that's what the internet does. And I'd be really curious to hear what you thought of the conversation and about these points here too. So leave a comment.
Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here. Ooh, this is going to be a lot of fun, you guys. I am excited. So what we have tonight is two, you could say, veteran debaters when it comes to Jordan Peterson. Although they've got debate experience in other ways, we've had both these gentlemen on. And I can tell you, by getting to chat with them, I'm like, I really enjoy both of their personalities. So I'm excited that they're meeting tonight, and that I would say these guys are also very experienced in terms of the work of Jordan Peterson, one of the most controversial figures of our time, and it's just going to be a blast to hear them. So first, I just want to say up front, thank you very much for Vaush and Paul Vanderklay. We appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for coming on tonight.
It's my pleasure.
The pleasure is mine entirely. Thank you. And to those of you who are watching in the Modern Day Debate channel, a phenomenal channel, and you should go check it out if you have not already. I apologize for my invisibility. My second camera crapped out on me, okay? So you're going to be enjoying Paul's face. And you know what? I am going to be too, to be perfectly honest. Phenomenally goom goatee. We are all lucky to be in its presence.
Very. It enchants.
See, I'm buttering you up. That's the debate. That's debate tactic number one. Now it's harder to be mean to me.
An enchanting goatee indeed. And we are stoked. I want to let you know both of the speakers have their links in the description already. So if you're enjoying listening to them and you're like, I like that, you want more, excellent, you can get it at those links right down there in the description. See? So glad to have them here. And also want to mention, if this is your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button if you want reminders about future debates we have coming up. For example, we have a tag team debate tomorrow night. Skylar Fiction and none other than his friend and partner, Dr. Josh, will be on here going against Joel and Tyler on Christian ethics. So that will be a provocative one, another juicy one. And also want to say, whether you be Republican, Democrat, one of the many strange creatures in between, Christian, atheist, you name it, we are glad that you are here. It's a nonpartisan channel. We have no stances other than we just think dialogue and debate are good things, and we are glad to have you here. So with that, we're going to jump right into this discussion. Thank you again, gentlemen. Want to just basically, I guess, since Vaush is taking the affirmative, and kind of let him get the ball rolling in terms of why he would take his stance. And then from there is just kind of right into the discussion. So, Vaush, the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So Jordan B. Peterson is a figure that I've had conflicted feelings on for a while. I don't personally like him very much, but that's largely irrelevant. You know, that can be aesthetic preferences. When it comes to his content, though, when it comes to the stuff he does, on one hand, I don't actually have much of a problem with the prescriptive judgments he makes in concerns to psychology and self-help. Now I admit, I'm not, I don't have a doctorate in psychology. I don't really have the professional background to understand the extent of and the nature of the claims that he makes or their validity specifically. But the broader takes that he has, for example, the need of order in one's life, to take care of your surroundings, to be prescient, to be disciplined and responsible, to take happiness as a measure from one's accomplishment, to not allow yourself to such and such, chaos is a dragon. I don't actually disagree with a lot of that. And there are probably a lot of young men, who stand to benefit from that advice. And in that respect, I have nothing but respect. Where my problems come in is that he is not actually known for his self-help. He achieved prominence when he published that video series following the voting into law, the legislation C-16 in Canada, and he did this very performative, political correctness, free speech on campus. I will not be arrested for my views, kind of thing. And it's fun and glad and dandy. But his political takes, his historical takes, basically everything he does that deviates from his background, from his field, are deeply troubling. There's the obvious and inescapable sort of misogyny behind many of his propositions. Chaos is feminine. Women wearing lipstick in the workplace. We don't know if men and women can work together. There are a lot of views there that I take issue with. But last but not least, and I guess I shouldn't, gish gallop, the main one that really gets me is his neocultural I'm actually forgetting the particular way he strings together these words. These neo-Marxist postmodernists, or postmodern neo-Marxists. There we go. It's leaving aside the problems in that terminology. He propagates this myth, and this is a very troubling myth to me because it leads inexorably towards fascism. And it is the myth that our institutions are crumbling under the weight of a conspiracy, a far left, culturally Marxist conspiracy theory that has infiltrated essentially every aspect of Western society, that is now enforcing its authority by forcing us to use perhaps gender pronouns, that the recipient wishes to have used on them. And this is essentially fascist propaganda. It's mostly indistinguishable from cultural Bolshevism, the conspiracy theory that was so loved by the Nazis. And it makes me wonder, how much of this is poisoning the discourse? How many young men are getting a good sale on personal life advice mixed in with a lot of bad? That's what I worry about.
Okay.
You bet. All yours, Paul.
Oh, well, the question to me was interesting because I don't really know how many people he's hurt, but I got interested in Jordan Peterson not so much because of the culture war issues. Those things caught my attention. I didn't know why a professor of psychology at University of Toronto would be kvetching over gender fluid pronouns. What caught my attention was the fact that I heard a lot of people listening to him and saying things like they're interested in the Bible and they're interested in going to church. And as a pastor, I listened to this, and I listened to Jordan Peterson, and I noted he's not much of an institution builder. And so then my concern was, who is going to come after Jordan Peterson with the people that he is talking to and help them find something a little bit more sustainable to work on their lives with. And so then what I did was I made a video about Jordan Peterson. I intended maybe to get some other interested conversation partners. And what began to happen was I started getting a steady stream of emails and requests for speaking to people. And as that happened, I started having conversations with people who'd been watching Jordan Peterson quite a bit. And as I began talking to those people, I began sharing some of those conversations online with the consent of the people that I was discussing it with, and discovering that a good number of people found themselves finding relief from depression, and probably depression from nihilism or something of that fact, and finding themselves feeling a lot better, performing better, having some motivation to work on their personal lives, to work on their relationships. And I've just spent the last 2 years mostly talking to people that have pretty much said, my life is better because I listened to Jordan Peterson, and I followed his, some of his advice, like do what is meaningful, not what's expedient. And along the way, my life is better. And what I've done as a pastor is try to gather these people together so that they could support each other and make good goals and keep moving forward. And in that group have been mostly men, but a certain probably 20% of them have been women. Many of the women that began to follow me and seek out conversation with me were mothers, probably who had seen sons and nephews who had been struggling in school, and after listening to Jordan Peterson, actually began to get their lives on track. So I'm uncertain as to how many people have been hurt by Jordan Peterson, but I've got a pretty good sense of how many people have been helped by him.
Okay. Are we moving into open debate, or is there a
You bet.
Gotcha. Hell yeah. Yeah. I'm so happy. I was afraid we were gonna have like another like bad faith shouting match. This is fantastic. Okay, so I don't disagree with anything that you said. I strongly disagree. Disagree. That's a very a light word for what I feel. I despise the alienation that has gripped so many people in our society. You know, this detachment from oneself, the detachment from an ability to sort of pursue meaningful work. And there are so many disciplines that try to pursue this question. For example, like the anti-capitalist wrote like method of describing this would be like alienations from one work and one's community brought about by the material like modernization of social and the commodification of life, you know. But there's a million ways that you can approach that. I would love very much so to help or to see people helped with their depression. My concern though is have you ever heard, I don't know how much you like what like horrid corners of the internet you like poke your head into from time to time. Have you ever heard of a place called the red pill?
I've heard of the red pill, sure.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm glad its reputation precedes. It's this community, and I don't know how much exactly you know, but it's a community on Reddit, though it has like branches elsewhere. And it's a very virulently misogynistic self-help community that advocates men are like intrinsically superior to women, and women should be like the second in command of their own lives, and men need to be strong and learn how to manipulate women's emotions in order to maximize their gain out of life. And women enjoy this process because women are designed to be like emotionally subservient. And the red pill isn't as relevant as it used to be. But I remember back in the day when talking about whether or not this was a horrid place, people would say like, this place is disgusting. It's filled with virulent misogyny. These people talk about like why rape should be legal. Like these people are beyond the pale. And then somebody else would say, true, okay, fine, fair. However, they have given me a lot of advice, you know, go outside, you got to exercise, eat clean. And they would list off these like self-help tidbits that like, that resonated with them, to which the response, you know, is, don't you think there are other ways and from other communities that you could have learned those messages? And that's my problem with JBP. And you, I think, might partially agree with that because you, if I'm understanding what you said correctly, you're of the opinion that there's not much longevity to the advice that he offers because it's centered almost around a cult of personality he holds.
I don't know if the advice centers around a cult of personality, but I think now since his retreat from the stage because of I think the illness of his wife and then his hospitalization, I think that sort of marks the end of at least the first Jordan Peterson wave. We have yet to see if there'll be a second wave when he publishes his new book, if he does another speaking tour. Many of the people who have watched his videos reached a saturation point at some point. And so they got motivated to clean up their room. But again, as a pastor, I know that people can go to a church service, they can hear a sermon or see a presentation, they can be moved and they can make all kinds of pledges to improve their lives. But what does it take to actually improve your life? That we are far more shaped by our habits than we are by our intentions. And so the community that is gathered around me, I highly doubt too many misogynists would want to listen to 1 to 2 hour messages and conversations by a Christian minister, because they're not going to get that sort of anti-woman slant. And so that hasn't been the community that has gathered around me. Whether some people would pick up certain strains of what Jordan has to say and interpret it in a misogynist or in a certain light. Peterson himself has on various occasions rejected this alt-right tag. And I think reasonably so, because at least, I mean, Canadian politics are a little bit to the left of American politics. And if you listen to a lot of his older messages, he was sort of a moderate Canadian in terms of, I mean, he believes in the Canadian healthcare system and all of this. So in terms of tracking him in that way, but people are prone to listen to messages and interpret it in the ways that they find useful and then propagate it with their own slants. And so that people would take this with his messages, that's fine. But I don't know if there will be a chapter 2 for Jordan Peterson on the public stage like there was a chapter 1. And so my intention was, well, those people who have been energized and motivated by his message, what can I do to build a community around them to make their lives better? That's been my goal.
Okay, yeah, I think that's an extremely reasonable goal. What? Well, oh, I mean, obviously, I think it's an admirable one. What? So distancing Peterson from the community he often fosters, which I think anyone could charitably describe perhaps as a mixed bag. You've experienced from his community a group of people who are earnest in their desire to seek self-improvement and not bogged down with the milieu of reactionary politics. What specific pieces of advice do you think he offers that really resonate with the people who need that help? Like, I know that obviously, like, the clean your room. Like, I know that's like a classic one. But in your experience, what parts of what he says like really hit home with those people?
I think so. So for many of the people, a lot of the impact they received, at least, again, this is part of a sample bias because I'm a Christian minister and I started making commentaries on his biblical series. So then my question was, and really I got into him and started studying him because I wanted to know why there are, you know, thousands of churches, including my own, that have plenty of empty seats, and this Canadian psychologist could fill a, a moderately sized concert hall in Toronto, charging $40 a seat, selling out each time, giving 2+ hour lectures on the Bible. I mean, what is that about? And to me, it showed a hunger in our society for a level, well, for a certain kind of biblical commentary of all things that people had an intense hunger for. And those people who listened to it couldn't really tell me what they were getting out of it. And so that drove me to ask those questions and to try to figure out what on earth is going on. And I think it has a lot to do with the the emptiness of a secular life and the resonance that our connection to the past via nearly, via age old stories offers to people who look around and say, why am I alive? What does it matter? And, that was obviously something that, in terms of my church background, I'm equipped to do. So I pursued it. And I
Um,
think that part has been more significant than, his 12 rules for life. He had, some of the rules I think are helpful, but I don't think the Jordan Peterson impact has anything to do with the little cliched rules and bits of advice that he gives, because a lot of that stuff has been around forever. And a lot of mothers were a little bit annoyed by the fact that their son started listening to this guy saying stuff that they had been telling their sons and
yeah, the
nagging their
mom
sons
and
for a
dad have been
very long
saying for
time.
20 years. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, wait, hold on. I got to challenge you on that. Do you feel there's an inherent emptiness to secular life, or do you think that secularity might correspond, or like there might be a correlation between the two?
I think a lot of people felt a void. So there's been another Canadian psychologist that I've done some work with named John Vervaeke, and he's labeled what he calls a meaning crisis. Now this isn't new. You can pretty much pervasive throughout the 20th century. People have been struggling with meaning and nihilism, and meaning actually is, see, for Jordan Peterson, meaning is a sacrament. It connects us to the transcendent and the divine. And I think a lot of people struggled with meaning, especially men, because I don't think men in our, there's a whole lot here. Before the age of 22, many people in our society are given no responsibility, and they're expected to just keep going through school until they get out of college, and then maybe someone will give them a responsibility, which is a very different thing from how human beings have lived for just about the rest of human history. And I think what Jordan Peterson helped put on the map is that their life does mean something and they should get going with it. And some people took him up at his offer and discovered, yeah, that's really important. And but again, I saw that you're motivated to do something in a minute, you're going to need someone to help you keep doing it.
Yeah, I don't disagree that this is typically a problem that men face, especially because masculinity has seen so much deconstruction over the past 50 years in a way that I don't believe femininity has. And then there are a wide variety of social reasons for that. And I'm a gender abolitionist. I support that process. I don't want there to be men or women or anything really. But I do recognize that as they exist now, men as the construct are struggling. And I do want something done about that. The issue that I have here is that it's very easy to ascribe solutions that end up having really bad consequences down the road. After all, the characteristic alienated young man, lonely, not particularly good with women. These are all fairly rote tropes. This is the pool from which pretty much all political radicalization stems from, whether that be far left socialist, whether that be ISIS suicide bomber. This is like the still water mosquito breeding ground from which you can get a lot of really extreme political views. And I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people are brought about to political radicalization through what is essentially loneliness and alienation. But I'm also worried that some attempts to fix that might end up leading these people down roads that are unsustainable or actively detrimental to society. Which is why, and I have to bring it back to this, in your experience, you've met a lot of people who have benefited from JBP's teachings, or at least the message resonated. That's great. I wouldn't, no problem with that. The issue I have is that in the context of his broader popularity, which is aligned for the most part with right-leaning politics, what with him getting his start with the trans pronoun thing and C16 and such, it feels as though it's very difficult to distinguish people who genuinely could benefit from JBP and his advice and his outlook, and people who are just along for the ride who might end up going down a really bad road a year or two or three down that way. And there are secular people I know too who have jumped in on JBP, quite a few of them. And it's probably not for his biblical talks. It's probably for the political ascriptions that he sort of pushes into his self-help rhetoric.
I think Jordan Peterson was something of a Rorschach test. A lot of people gathered around him from a lot of different agenda areas. One of the things that I did early on, so I started making videos, and people are like, well, people in Sacramento started talking to me, well, we should do a meetup. And I thought, well, I don't know. Okay, I've got a church building. I'm used to leading small groups. Let's do a meetup. And so I, put something on meetup.com, and people started coming, and I began to, so who's going to show up to this thing? Mostly men, probably again, 8 out of 10 were men. And I was curious, are these going to be the proverbial basement dwellers who are living in their mom's basement covered with Cheetos dust, playing video games and looking at porn all day? Most of the men that showed up were, in fact, doing very well in terms of, they had a job, they're earning very good money, they're actually quite well put together, many of them single, a few people struggling in some of those ways that we imagine Jordan's followers were. One of the things that came out very quickly is that many of the men are dealing with a difficulty in terms of what I call the generational handshake, and which is men and women finding each other, establishing a stable monogamous relationship, having children, and being able to manage a marriage, which is not an easy thing for anyone, being able to manage a marriage well for the long term. I think part of what got people's interest is, ironically, Jordan Peterson comes out and starts advocating for some of these traditional positions. And so that's why a lot of conservatives sort of gathered around him. But so it was interesting because I suddenly have this group of men around me, and my wife goes off to Tahoe with a group of friends, and she comes back to me and says, do you know any guys who are like in their mid 30s and have good careers and are single? Because I just spent the whole weekend with a whole bunch of 30-something women who have been successful in their careers, and they would love nothing better than to find a man to settle down with. And so what we've seen, I think, is
good news, fellas.
Well, except, most of the men in my group are just a little bit too young. And the difficulty is that I think you're right in that society for the last 40, 50 years has been trying to renegotiate what it means to be a woman in our society. And so there's been a tremendous amount of emphasis and focus on that aspect. And there's been relatively little work done on the men's side of the equation. And so what we have right now is we have a lot of men and a lot of women who have a lot of dissatisfaction with whether men and women can find each other and settle down and get married, have children, and continue the species. And so I don't know. And Jordan Peterson sort of came out and said, you know what? You should, you should stop living with your girlfriend. You should marry her and you should settle down and form a family. I found a lot of women who are I find a lot of women who are actually quite excited to hear that someone is telling men to stop using women for sex and to make a commitment and to actually be a man, which means follow through with your word, make a commitment, stay in there when times are hard, because that's what it means to be a man. And people got that message from Jordan Peterson, and I thought that's a positive message.
So I agree with what you've said. There has been reconstruction done in what we understand femininity to mean, and not so much done in regards to men. I know, and I say this because I live stream, I talk to a decent number of people. There are a lot of dudes who have absolutely no idea how they're meant to live their lives. On one hand, there's the archetypically masculine, the hegemonic, you just get your job and you settle down, you marry, quickly, and you have the children. And then on the other hand, like, many of the social institutions that made that a viable choice 40, 50 years ago are starting to wear a bit. A lot of the social and literal institutions, what with the wages not rising to meet cost of living standards, and it leaves people in a bit of a bind when it comes to where to move forward from that point. And I don't know if what Jordan B. Peterson advocates, this sort of Christian traditionalism, is that way. I don't know if it's sustainable in the long run. It feels to me like everything that we had upon which that gender dynamic was built is on a train, and it is hurtling towards a mountainside. And what Jordan B. Peterson is doing is making sure people don't jump off the train before it hits. I feel like the systems he's trying to advocate for are worn thin. They're wearing. And what we're going to see, even in regards to the people who are just earnestly interested in self-help, is that a little bit down the line, they've moved forward without realizing the rug's kind of been shuffled a little bit to the side. I imagine we're probably going to see people who, in their pursuit of sort of a traditional gender dynamic, aren't really capable of keeping up with society's rapidly evolving expectations for how people are supposed to behave. It's, in essence, a reactionary wave, a response to alienation from society with what has worked for centuries but may no longer. And that's why I'm hoping. You say that JBP's self-help may not have the longevity it needs. I'm hoping that if something comes next, or if something substitutes that, it might be a little bit more institutional. It might be more interested in tackling what it is with society that is causing people's problems than the idea that a dearth in personal discipline and traditional responsibility are responsible for the loneliness and absence that so many men feel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referring to when you talk about the train hurtling towards the mountainside. What is that train, or what's on that train?
I feel like the traditional gendered expectations. Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot himself. We don't know the rules for how men and women are supposed to work together in the workplace. And as segments of the society become more sort of progressive, marriage is becoming less and less of a viable option for people. Marriage rates are declining, divorce rates increasing. I feel like this almost, it's not necessarily countercultural. This revival of cultural efforts to impose traditional gender standards might inadvertently put people in a position where they are forced to break rather than bend, not meaningfully address what's going on with society and try to rectify that with your personal expectations, but rather stoically continue the course, to plant your feet firmly on the ground and act well and act traditionally and act like a man in spite of whatever might change between now and the future. And that's a little worrying for me. I don't know how that's going to pan out in the long run. You know what I mean?
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, it's that women are being, so I did a meetup in San Francisco, just
Beautiful
in
city.
connection. Oh, it's a gorgeous city. And I did a meetup in San Francisco in conjunction with a Jordan Peterson event. The people setting up the event offered me a room to do a meetup, and I could get tickets sold and stuff. A fair number of women came to that meetup that don't usually come to my Sacramento meetups, and most of those women were in their mid-30s, and a lot of these women were angry because a lot of these women said, when I was in my 20s, people told me my career would be fulfilling. And I've pursued my career and I've been very successful. And now I'm in my mid 30s and I look at my mother's life, who had children and a husband and a home. And I think she made the better choice. And I feel robbed. Now, I also talked to men that I remember talking to one man, and he's in his 30s, and he had been together with his girlfriend, lived with her for about 3 or 4 years. And he told me, he said, she's been putting more and more pressure on to make a commitment and get married and have a child. And I kind of feel like the relationship has plateaued, and there's an opportunity in another city. And so I'm kind of thinking maybe of he didn't say it, but basically of ditching. And what he had done is lived with his girlfriend for the last 4 years or so, which for him, he moves to another city. He's in his mid 30s, finds another girlfriend, maybe in her 20s or 30s, and moves on with his life. And hey, no harm, no foul. I never promised you anything. But in the meantime,
That's a strategy.
that's right. This woman has spent 4 years of her life investing in him and getting nothing out of it. I now know more and more women now in their 30s looking at in vitro fertilization in order to try to have a child without a man. Now, I have had 5 kids, and so I know with my wife and I have been together 31 years. I know what it takes to raise a child, and it is not easy, and it is not getting easier. And so people keep talking about, well, this traditional landscape, maybe that won't work. I have yet to see someone that is proposing that something that would work, especially for children. Because what I've seen in talking to a good many people is that the nihilism and the depression, almost all of them have told me stories about their parents breaking up and their father's new girlfriend or their mother's new boyfriend, and on and on. I don't see a lot of hope in that line, and I don't have a lot of confidence that we're just going to make something up that works better than what we've done before, as difficult as what we've done before has been.
I worry that a lot of the ascriptions we make of past times are tainted by rose-colored glasses. A lot of people, this is commonly cited, for example, a lot of people speak about how women are now less happy than they were back before it was commonly accepted for a woman to work. That women's liberation in the workplace liberation in the workplace has come at a cost to their happiness, and that makes a kind of intuitive sense after all. I mean, it's work, it's and it's probably not as intuitively fulfilling as raising a family is. Everyone loves raising families. I mean, being around kids, I think these are just dopamine machines.
Do you have any children?
I know. I'm sorry.
Do you have any children?
No, I do not. I know. I was about to say caveat, not a parent. I don't know. I like kids. They're nice, I can't devil to raise. I do not doubt it. I do not doubt it. But I think fundamentally people like raising kids and in a broader spiritual sense. And but at the same time, there are a lot of things we'd like to gloss over when we look at how the traditional dynamic happened sort of in the past. With the nuclear family, when it was more common. We can choose an arbitrary time period, 50s, 60s. But there was a lot of abuse. In fact, spousal rape wasn't even recognized until fairly recently in some states. And there was a lot of, I think, genuine unhappiness that was painted over by the expectation that everyone keep going and pretend everything's fine. That stiff upper lip mentality. That's not to say it's necessarily worse than what we have now, but the reason why things fell apart, I don't think, is because of like feminism or radical progressive or cultural Marxism or anything like that. I think it's rather because the economic circumstances that allowed people to support themselves in the nuclear family just kind of fell apart. You can no longer live off one income in a family, at least not for 90% of Americans. So now people are working gig jobs. The unemployment is incredibly low, but underemployment is radically high. People don't really know if in 6 months they're going to have the same job. People don't really have a sense of attachment to their workplace, and people are owning homes with less and less often. More and more empty properties are getting bought up by exorbitantly wealthy companies that are using them as like investment opportunities. And it seems like the American dream is dying. And I think those gender roles were part of the American dream. And this is where I unveil my true power level, because I believe that humans work best operating communally. I think that one of the most horrific things that modern liberalism, like capitalism, anything post-enlightenment, one of the most horrid things it's done to us is it's forced us off, to cordoned us into these little suburban boxes where you don't know the name of your neighbor across the street, where you work gig jobs, you barely know the name of your employees before you're fettered out to work your next. You're alienated. And I think that's what people are suffering from, really. And it happens in our relationships too. Nobody has the monetary to commit. The bedrock is gone. It's just people now, lonely and trying not to end up on the street, which is easy. There are a lot of support programs out there. At least it's easy for some. But to live comfortably, that is incredibly hard now. And I wonder if we couldn't accommodate this new frenetic life, which will surely soon see changes, with a different type of dynamic, a different way of addressing that alienation. Socialism.
I
throwing it in at the end. So you
can socialism underneath.
Just need to slide it underneath the paper slip under the door.
Whoa, socialism! How'd you get in here? I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's interesting, however, that in almost every case, women initiate divorce, yet divorce is almost always catastrophic for the women and children. And so, whereas I certainly agree with you that the past, let's say the past corporate model, where in the 50s and 60s you had the company man who had a pension being managed by the corporation and good job security and sufficient income so that his wife could, stay home with the kids. I think a lot of people would give their eye teeth for that today. And that's simply gone. And so there's no question in my mind. I've lived and worked most of my life in Black communities in America. My father planted a church in the struggling Black community of the First Ward of Peterson, New Jersey. I live in a multi-everything community in Sacramento, California. And the economic factors undermining many of these communities' ability to sustain a marriage is significant. On the other hand, and I very much agree with you that humans work best operating communally. And as a pastor, what I would say is that the question is, how can people work communally? Because the struggles that people have working community are sometimes financial. But again, in most cases, even if there's one of the members of the family is marginally or underemployed, the other member of the family is better employed, you've still got two income earners, if they can get along, managing to keep one household together. And generally speaking, financially, people do better that way. I've known people, there was one young man who was coming to church for a while, and his parents were divorced and still living together. They hated each other's guts, but they couldn't afford to live separately. And so on one hand, there certainly is the economic aspect, but on the other hand, what it actually takes for two people to get along over 20, 30 years goes way beyond some romantic notions of love. And I completely agree with you that a big part of this has been the demise of institutions and institutional learning that not only encourages people to work hard on their marriages and their relationships with the people with which whom they share a home, but also provides support to help them get along. In many cases, if a marriage is in crisis, within 6 years, they'll work it out if they can stick with it and work on it and negotiate it out. And there are just the way that society is structured now. And I think it's a good thing that society, a woman can get out of a marriage just as easily as a man can today. And I think that's a good thing. The difficulty that we have are when people come into marriage with sort of a selfish, personal aspect that says, I'm going to stay in this relationship for as long as it suits me. You're never going to be able to build a marriage on that. And there's going to have to be another foundation upon which the relationship needs to stand for the marriage to be sustainable and have really legs going into the future.
Okay, 100% agreed. I think 2 points to that. The first thing that I would ask, I'm really split on this. On one hand, and I can be open about my position on this. I believe very much in like polyamory. I want like polycules to be an ideal relationship. I think that people are generally stronger in structures of more than two people. Obviously, as being young, I've met plenty of people who've had less than successful, triages into that type of lifestyle. But I think that under certain circumstances, it can produce pretty stable bonds. And I wouldn't be opposed to seeing this explored kind of as a broader model. So my bias here is evident. And sometimes I do think in that way that you just described rather disparagingly, this I'm in here for my own benefit, excluding a kid, by the way. Of course, I don't have a child. I wouldn't just like ditch a child. But I'm here for my benefit. If I'm not having fun, I can dip. That's my right. I have that right. And on one hand, there is some validity to that. I get one life. I don't believe in an afterlife personally. Even you would agree. We have one life here. I've got my one chance. I
don't want more than one here. So
that's
fair. Say that to the reincarnation folks. I believe in reincarnation. You want to come around again?
Listen. Okay, don't depress my chat members. Look, life is suffering. It's good character building. How do you strike a happy balance between getting people to commit? And I mean that in the healthiest way imaginable, not like to your dying breath you're bound, but how do you get people to invest in one another without getting people to paint over the red flags? Because abuse in relationships is like a really common thing in every segment of society, every race, every type of relationship, homosexual, heterosexual, every age. This happens like a lot. And the ability to divorce easily is good in a way because it lets people get out of that situation unless they have kids or unless they don't have the money to. But on the other hand, a frivolity of thought when we approach relationships probably does lead to us feeling kind of empty at the end of the day. How do you find a working ground between painting over abuse and horrid relationships people should get out of and encouraging people to stick it out, to be together?
A couple nights ago, I watched on Netflix. I watched the documentary "Surviving R. Kelly," and that was a fascinating program in terms.
I heard that was a hot one. Yeah.
Oh, wow! And so you've got women who are living in separate rooms in his studio who are peeing into a bucket and have to check in with him to leave their room. And he's having them in all kinds of different permutations, taking videotapes of it. A bunch of these women are underage. And towards the end of it, there's one mother who is trying to get her daughter out of there after 9 years. And, they haven't been able to lock this man up because none of the women seem to want to, go to court and say, yeah, this is what he did. And so that, I think, is an illustration of just how tricky psychologically dynamics of abuse can be. And anyone who's dealt with battered women and some of those dynamics know just how difficult this can be when you really have a monster manipulator, someone like R. Kelly, at least that program certainly portrayed him to be. So that is certainly something. I think the deep problem with our contemporary approach is simply this. We look at people as means to an end. This person, or even this relationship, is a way to make me happy. And that's the commodification of other human beings. And I believe that human beings are not to be used, but are to be loved. Now you have the question. Now, then we say, well, how can we get people to? Well, first of all, let me tell you, as a pastor, there's no getting people to do anything. You know, I make a living talking to people and telling them what they're all willing to support me saying to them, and them turning around and not wanting to do it, because it is not natural for us to love in the kind of ways we all want to be loved. And what it takes, and I think you're very much when you say humans work best operating in community, because what it takes is for the community to be gathered and focused and in agreement around certain values and factors, such as human beings are to be loved and not used. And what that means when you go into a marriage is that you say, I am not going into this marriage for my happiness. I am going into this marriage for the sake of the other. Now, there's definitely that can get twisted in an abusive relationship, and that certainly does happen. And there needs to be intervention when that does happen. But what it takes is for one person to basically say, I am going to lay down my life for another person. You know, usually not to that extreme, but when you have a child, you lay down your life for that child, because there's no more selfish individual in the world than a newborn, because that newborn wakes up in the middle of the night and says, I want to be fed, I want to be changed, I want it right now. You talk to that newborn all you want, it ain't going to make a difference. And so what we do, and what marriage actually teaches us, is to learn to love. And what love means is to lay down our life and give our lives for others. And how do you create a community where people live that way and are surrounded by that value? Well, that's what I do as a pastor. We as a society have looked at that and said, well, we don't think we want that. It's like, okay, but then you get the consequence of people saying, I want to find someone who's going to make me happy. Well, that's sort of a nice way of saying, I'm going to use this other person for my happiness. And I'd say long term, whether it's 2 people or 3 people or 4 people, it doesn't work.
There are a lot I can see in my chat scrolling by. There are a lot of people who like that take. To clarify, what do you mean by it's not natural to love someone in the way you want to be loved?
I think all of us would like to imagine we can be with someone who will love for us and care for us. And let's say something would happen to us. We'd get in a car accident, we get Alzheimer's, something like this, that our spouse would stand by us until the day we die. That's what we all want. But for that, and I've seen enough spouses who their wife or their husband had Alzheimer's or a stroke, and they they cleaned up after them, they fed them, they cared for them, and they did it sometimes for years, even decades. We all want that out of others, but what it takes to give requires not just, I want to be the kind of person that takes care of my spouse. It actually does take a community that has the values that reinforce that kind of sacrificial giving. And one of the things that you said earlier, I think, comes into that. When we say in our lives, I have just one life, this is my shot to get happiness and meaning and everything I want out of it. If you go into life that way, at some point you're going to look at the equation and say, I'm sitting here tied to this person that has Alzheimer's. I could dump them in a hospital and this person wouldn't even know. They don't even remember my name, and then go out and get my happiness, because after all, I deserve it. That's what society is saying. And this is the results we're seeing in society, is what you get from that kind of valuation. And now I would argue as a Christian minister that actually, if in this world, you make this world better, if you actually can imagine to say, you know what, I can sacrifice my time and my life for this spouse that I've had a complicated relationship with, but I'm going to be faithful to him or her until they die, because actually I believe I have eternity to live, which will be a lot better than this place right here. So I can do that. Now, again, I appreciate the fact that most of us hear that and say, I don't know about that, but that's because we're looking at life through one set of lenses. But we sure want our neighbors and our spouses and our children to believe that. And so if we want them to believe it, well, it takes a community that actually keeps raising up those values and puts them forward. And I think that's part of the reason that we have all of these ideas that, well, we deserve to be loved. Well, do we have what it takes to actually love?
Pretty convincing. There's a deep philosophical split on this one, I think. Not even a split necessarily, a split perspective, or maybe an incongruence between two values. Because I agree with everything that you just said in regards to the validity in loving people beyond utilitarianism, to be able to appreciate one's company, or to care for someone, even if in some broad hard numbers sense you recognize that your life utility is not being maxed out by those actions. It's important, however, to stick by those things. And everyone's fondest memories of compassion and trust, I think, are from people who did that. If they were sick or unwell and somebody else cared for them, even though it would have made all the sense in the world for them to leave. For many people, this would be parents. For some people, it would be a close partner. For some, it would even be their children. And that's what everyone wants. And you're right. Not everyone has a mindset which is amicable towards that mentality. Though I suppose if you really went back on it, if you really parse the numbers or something, you could argue that the sublime experience of deep reciprocal unconditional compassion between two people would maximize utility. But it's a mindset thing. A question then, in regards to JBP, then to cycle it back, I think, to the man himself. This is one issue that I have with him that I think extends to his self-help more specifically than it does his politics. He's said, somewhat hypocritically, it turned out, because he's now, being taken care of for his addiction problem, which I won't make fun of. I don't think that's proved at all. But he did say that it is one should ensure their room is clean before trying to change the world. Essentially, that you should make sure your own house is in order, everything's set, you're fine, you're good, before affecting change. But you and I agree on something. A lot of the reason why people are experiencing this horrid alienation from their life, their inability to form meaningful bonds, is because a lot of the institutional structures that made those livelihoods possible and affordable have begun to crumble. And this is one key distinction I have here. I think that in many cases, one's room is unclean because of the society in which we live. And in order to clean that room, that society must be changed. I would see, for example, the economic superstructures that are failing so many people right now changed, not necessarily by people who have their act together, but from the people who don't because of those systems. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. The difficulty that we have with systems are that they are made of people. And so what's sort of, it's always hard to know. Well, just think about, whatever group of people you're living with now, if you're living with other people. Maybe it's in the context of an apartment building, or maybe it's in a neighborhood, or maybe it's within one household. You could say, well, what does it take for us to be a household that keeps our own house clean and does the dishes? And so if you've ever lived with roommates in college, you have some roommates that are slobs and some roommates who are neatniks. And so you could say, well, which is it? Is it us as a group, or is it us as an individual? And it's always both and. One of the when he said, keep your house in perfect order before you go out to fix the world, basically. Perfect was such a poor choice of words there, because the truth is none of us are perfect. But the question of society first or the individual first, that's always a very difficult one. What I like to say is that without individuals, nothing changes, and without institutions, nothing lasts. And so part of what we're seeing is that there's certainly, the market in some ways likes to incentivize the commodification of people. And that's a real problem. And
I agree completely.
And so employers who, politically, you might have, you probably don't know anything about my politics, but it doesn't matter. I have a problem with industries that don't give health care to their employees. If we're going to have employers, if we're going to run healthcare through employers, and I would be in favor of, a lot more than that. And so there's no question in my mind that we can use some structural change, but the question of individual versus societal, that's a weakness, I think, with Jordan Peterson that I think was manifest in his program that I saw as a pastor, because again, I saw he's out there talking about the individual. Great. It's very true that I can't change anyone I'm living with. I can only change myself. I should be the change, to use that little thing, and act the way I want others to act. I have to do that first. But you're exactly right. And that's what I'm saying in terms of marriage. There needs to be an institution and a community around us that reinforces those values. And community certainly works better when we have some assurance that the others with which we are sharing this community have the same value. It's being reinforced, and we can all work on it together.
Yeah. If you, I'm trying to think, like, what would, so politics aside, and of course, well, there is no such thing. All of this is deeply political, but I should say, the political differences between myself and JBP aside, I'm trying to think now, what would be the optimal JBP if you could construct them somehow. Somebody, a person sent, I don't know if you're from God, I don't know. So somebody constructed to help people out of the alienation which seems to accompany modern society. When I think of that person, I think of, I'm of course biased by my politics. I think of somebody who's very far left, who wants to build a really strong economic base to allow everyone to live a dignified life, because we have the money for it. At least here in America, we could, with proper incentive structures, have everyone live at least a lower middle class living with no like substantive economic issues, to ensure everyone can enjoy a baseline standard of living, which is certainly above what welfare provides us today, which is pitiful in this day and age in this country, and which encourages people to form strong communal relations with others, to be trusting and open, to be disciplined. Absolutely, that's important, but also to be open to the possibility that sometimes the issues that are affecting their life are not an evidence of personal failing, but rather evidence that the house in which they live, the society in which they live, needs correcting, to ensure a revolutionary mindset in people, a willingness always to challenge social institutions, so that there will always be a sort of the civil spirit necessary to maintain the common dignity of the average citizen. What does an ideal JBP look to you? Like, how do they deliver that?
Oh, I think we have the JBP that there is, and I think he's done a lot of good, and I'm satisfied with that. I'm reluctant to boil these issues down to economics. I spent 7 years of my life living in the Dominican Republic, working mostly with Haitians, and I cannot recall a single instance of a suicide attempt amongst those Haitians. And these people, for the most part, were illegal immigrants in a far poorer country than the United States, living in grass huts and shacks made of garbage, and basically working for tyrannical either government organizations or coffee growers and scratching out a living, working gardens. I watched the David Chappelle thing on Netflix last night, and he makes the point at the beginning of it. Anthony Bourdain has about the best job that any of us could imagine, flying around the world, eating the world's best food, talking to the world's most interesting people. That's his job, and he kills himself. And the Haitians living in those huts in the Dominican Republic, I never once heard of a suicide. And so the confidence that I have that a predominantly economic program would yield the kind of well-being we imagine, I don't think actually pertains. Because as a pastor, you get to see the lives of people, and I've seen a lot of very unhappy people with a lot of money, And a lot of people who enjoy life, you know, I grew up mostly around African American folks, and you know, some of the best times I've had have been with just hanging out with junkies and poor folks. And you know, yeah, life is hard, but they've got meaning and happiness. And I think, again, one of the main things that Peterson communicated was that the quest for happiness is not as simple as we imagine it to be. And what's actually true is that meaning is a far more sustainable entity, and that which in fact is most in distress. Every now and then I'll do a sermon that touches on suicide. One of the things I noted is that one of the places in the United States with the highest suicide rate was a high school in Silicon Valley. The children of the titans of industry that have more going for them in terms of economic security than any of us on this channel would ever hope for. And so I think if we're looking for well-being predominantly from an economic rearrangement, I think we'll be dissatisfied.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the grand paradoxes, right? Right now, the suicide rate in America is at its highest for middle-aged white men who are demographically much better off than many of the other constituencies. Suicide rates are, as you noted, at least for the American Black community, substantially lower than they are on average for the white community. It's the same for Hispanics. I'm inclined to believe this is because of their family structure. Also, there's
which is traditional.
Oh, no denying that. But I wonder if the conditions of traditional family structures and how they positively affect one's well-being could be supplemented in a less traditional way that nonetheless keeps the spirit of the original organization. I remember this is something that's always stuck with me. It's something that I read a very long time ago. I did bother to look it up. It is true, even if the citations have left me now. But I remember there was a Greek philosopher who existed some 2000, whatever, ancient Greek philosopher. And he was interested in the study of happiness, which I guess we would now term as like meaningfulness or well-being or contentedness, because it wasn't just like, haha, happy. And what he discovered, and he was laughed at, he was ridiculed by his contemporaries because all the other philosophers were learning about form and meaning and the essence of consciousness. And he was off trying to find how to have a good time. And what he discovered, you know, from his teachings, at least, was that the best way for a human being to be happy would be for them to live along with 8 to 12 friends in a villa, which was suitably sized such they all had private bedrooms, but shared communal spaces such as living rooms, dining rooms, kitchens, and such. And he believed after all of his life that this was the optimal way for human beings to live. And he died, as one does. And other people, I think, eventually took towards following his writings after his passing. Epicurus, chat says.
That's him. Yep.
Okay. Epicurus. I sound much smarter now. And other people took that teaching. And I am deeply moved by that idea because I've kind of wanted the same thing my life too. I grew up with very good parents, you know, and I'm very happy for everything they gave me. But it was nonetheless a boxy home where I knew not the names of my neighbors. The idea of living in a shared space is almost like a dorm. I think this is why so many people have fond memories of their dorm experiences and probably corresponding negative ones as well. The idea of living like that, it's very enticing to me. And if you want to branch it out into sort of more of a relationship dynamic, there's the potential for sort of segmented, like your space with you and your partner, then the broader space with other families, and maybe you have the kids, but you know the others well enough that they could babysit for you, like on the way out. And you share, like 2 of you share a kitchen or 2 groups. It's very compelling. And what would be needed to see changes like that, or changes like how we structure homes so people live together, or changes in the workplace to ensure that workers aren't like just getting through the day with no ability to talk to one another due to really oppressive corporate rules. All of these are economic changes. How we design our homes, how we build our workplaces, how our schools are designed. How do we teach resource officers to deal with those who are suffering from depression? How much emphasis do we place on people's well-being following a depressive episode? All of these are economic or social changes. And that's what I really want to see. Not just making everyone wealthier, but building these structures that are facilitated around human happiness rather than capital acquisition. And I feel like, at least from what you said, that at least in regards to the sentiment, you may agree with a lot of that.
Well, the question I would have is, 2,300 years ago, Epicurus tried this. Why didn't it win the day? And then my question for you would be, when you go on vacation, do you stay in a hostel or a hotel?
Well, I will admit that I stay in a hotel. I have heard people say that they have positive experiences from hostels, and there might be other reasons why that's the case. Hostels tend to be very disgusting, for example. But if, for example, there was a
Who
way
makes
to
them disgusting?
Oh, well, of people, of course. But if they're people you care about and know and live with, Epicurus's ideas didn't take on because there's not much money to be had in making people happy. There's money to be had in making people scared. But we got close, I think, with villages in feudal times. Well, I mean, obviously people there were barren and wretched and miserable and had shit on their face all of the time. At the very least, they had meaning within a community who they cared about. Things were dirty there, not denying that. And it was mostly it was the horses, I imagine, who made it dirty. But they lived their lives, and there was a meaningfulness to that. And I think we can extrapolate that that communal spirit into how society functions today without returning to this this modernist liberal traditional idea of I mean liberal in like the Enlightenment sense, idea of like the nuclear family where people get locked off into these boxes. It feels like a grim return to an attempt at replicating the joy of an earlier and perhaps less profitable, but nonetheless superior system.
Do you know the American corporation that has the vision statement, "Make people happy"?
I mean, I've heard it before. Is it Facebook?
No, it's Disney.
Okay. That's so. I should have gotten that. That's a clear one.
And do they make much money?
I mean, hey, listen. I mean, if your point is that capitalism does a poor job of meeting human need, then I'm with you. I'm with you all the way.
My point is that happiness is people. I don't think people finally want happiness. They will trade their life for meaning. And ironically, I think, if we come all the way back to the question of Jordan B. Peterson, that is what's actually at the heart of, the first book that he wrote is more important book, which is not very readable, is Maps of Meaning, because people will go to war and be killed on the battlefield. People will put their bodies and lives at risk in childbirth. People will sacrifice everything that they have for meaning, but they will even, in fact, sacrifice their happiness for meaning. And I think if we can get an understanding of that, we might actually be able to figure out what kinds of institutions and social arrangements would actually give us more well-being than just, I think Epicurus in the end didn't succeed in changing the world because he was wrong. And I would argue that someone named Jesus Christ actually changed the world far more than Epicurus. And I would argue that he did so because he was right.
I don't think you can meaningfully extrapolate the validity of a position for how popular it is. There have been plenty of intelligent and wise men who have died penniless in the sewers, and plenty of idiots who have been elected to high office. I mean,
Jesus didn't make any money.
Jesus Christ's elevated reputation notwithstanding, there is plenty of empirical evidence to suggest that communal living is a good way about to live one's life. And I think that you see facsimiles of this in poorer communities as well. Now, I admit I'm speaking here not from experience, but only from reading, because I am rather privileged in my upbringing. But in everything that I have read and scantly encountered in some of the poorest communities in this country, the whatever glimpses of meaning and validity they picked from their lives were in a shared bond with their neighbors, with their community, and a willingness to do whatever it took to maintain the well-being of that community. To an irrational degree.
The more affluent people get, the more isolated they live, and that's exactly what we're seeing in North America.
Agreed,
the family size is shrinking, the more money we get. And so that's why I argue, if you put the emphasis on economic well-being, you're not actually going to address these questions of community.
What if you put the emphasis on economic socialization, redesigning social structures in a way that facilitate human contact? Everything, our workplaces, our schools, the way in which we like get services from others. Now we just like click a button on Amazon, it arrives at our door. Our families, all of it is getting more expedient and more distant. If we could find ways to streamline these systems in a way that facilitated human contact, I think that you would see people form a much more genuine bond with their community. And I think really good things can come from that.
I think the most expedient way to do that would be to have them have less money, and there would be more people living together, and you would.
Is that a Posadist I hear? Do you believe that true happiness can only come from the flames of apocalyptic nuclear hellfire? Only after we nuke the country can we rebuild and become truly one?
No.
Have you not heard of Posadism?
No.
Okay, all right. Okay. Now listen. Hey, listen.
I don't get to those dark corners of the internet very often.
I'm just saying. I mean, if you want to go hard on the poverty happiness correlative scale, then a nuclear winter sounds like a really, really quick way. No, I don't disagree. I don't disagree though. Like flippancy aside, I guess on the whole, I do think that right now the commodification of human life has made it difficult for us to really appreciate one another and form bonds. It's really difficult. We're obviously of different generations, so things maybe are different for me or for you than they were for. Well, okay, don't give me that face. I'm 25.
Oh yeah, we are. You're my children's age.
Yeah. Don't give me that face. I'm sorry. I know my face not on camera. I don't know if you forgot. I was just remember a beard. Like, oh god, this thing's 30, 40. Whatever the case may be, it's really hard to make friends now. Like, it's really genuinely difficult to make friends. Yeah. And there have been studies born out of this. A lot of it is because we don't leave our houses as much anymore. And listen, internet. Okay, I'm not. I may make my money here. I'm not defending the internet in that respect, though. I'm not going to bat for that. But in terms of also of like our IRL, like our in-person friends, so often the economic meanderings of life, the fact that you have to move to get jobs, or how much we have to work, or how fastidiously we have to dedicate our time to a profession, it kind of prevents us from making friends outside our work field. And even within that work field, usually most workplaces are nightmares. They're horridly alienating. You can't form friendships there, and in
fact, you're not supposed to. They don't want you to.
Yeah, it's disgusting, and it makes them more money, but it's disgusting. Yeah. And this is like our only chance. It's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for some people. Some people work more or less. I don't know, and that's their like main shot at socialization, and they're expressly, systemically prevented from doing so. And it's really sad. And there are so many people I know that are losing their friends, or who don't have any friends, and who find other ways of accommodating the desires that come about from friendship, like feeling validated by others. And that's like, I consider that the alienation from friendship. I would consider this like an apocalyptically bad social problem. Like, a lot of people make fun of incels. You know the term is like involuntary. Yeah. A lot of people make jokes about this. I try not to make jokes about this. This is like actually a real problem we're going to have to deal with. And whether that the solution comes from a return to more traditional family structures, or like some broad systemic reevaluation of how our social structures affect our ability to make friends, I will agree with you on this. It is glad to have people talking about that. And Jordan B. Peterson has definitely brought about that conversation in a way that many others haven't.
Well, and so I would say, well, what if you had a place where people could come together weekly, and you could reinforce the values and principles, and do some singing, and have some food together, and make friends and find potential spouses. Gosh, it'd be amazing if someone thought of a place like that. But yet churches are dying, including my own. So we're in a mess, and it's a mess of our own making.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Can I ask what church or sect or branch or whatever the proper terminology it is you follow? if it's not impolite to do so.
I'm a pastor in the Christian Reformed Church in North America, which comes out of the Dutch Calvinist tradition from Dutch immigrants.
So would that be Catholic then, right? If it comes
Calvinist.
Sorry, Calvinist. Okay, I admit I'm very ignorant about Christianity. The only thing I know is that the Catholics build the prettiest churches. I don't know where
they do. They really do.
That's
the Orthodox built some great churches too.
Yeah, and listen, the only thing that's okay, I will say this, okay, in Rod's so credit where credit is due, okay, in almost every town I've ever been in, the churches, synagogues, mosques, whatever, it doesn't matter, religious institutions, far and away the most beautiful buildings that I will ever see. Everything else is dull gray concrete office buildings, and that is genuinely sad to me that one of the last excuses we had to bust out our architectural chops is falling to the wayside.
Yeah, that's true.
So from an artistic perspective, at the very least, deeply saddening to me.
I agree.
That may be a point. We've gone over our normal hour of conversation.
Yeah, sorry. I did not expect to have a good faith conversation. It's been so long. It's actually extraordinary.
Well, this was enjoyable. I enjoyed this.
I couldn't agree more.
It was pleasant to speak to you as well.
This was so enjoyable to listen to. I was like, I'm not joking. I was like, I know I should, but I was like, I'm just going to keep letting it go because it's just been really interesting. I honestly am fascinated. And as a side note, too, the fact that you had both mentioned middle-aged white men actually commit the most suicide. I've never knew that. I never would have guessed either. So
a lot of them, just to clarify, a lot of them are medically facilitated. Like these are people who have like debilitating conditions that in all likelihood will mean their death soon anyway. So that does account for a small portion of the statistic, but a lot of it is also like systemic alienation for sure.
Wow. That is really, I never knew. So with that, we will jump to the Q&A. So thanks so much. What I'm going to do is just quick send the questions that we have over to the speakers just so that if you guys want a chance to skim through them as I go through the troll questions, you can take a peek at those. I'm going to send those via email and want to say thanks everybody for your questions. It's going to be, I think we're with this like roughly 10 minutes. We're going to try to zoom through as many as possible, and forgive me if we don't get